The decaying Miller farmstead was dark in autumn 1879, when the Dakota Territory was painted in amber and gold. Elizabeth Miller, the oldest of three sisters, counted the few money in her mother's old tea tin as the final sunshine trickled through damaged windows. Since their mother's death 3 months earlier, they had $23.42 to avoid famine. At 22, Elizabeth quietly raised her younger sisters, Catherine, 19, determination and expertise with therapeutic herbs, and Rebecca, 16, whose creative talents and compassionate demeanor brought beauty to their tough life. After their mother died, their father, Harold Miller, a famous Boston merchant, became a nasty, gambling drunkard, disappearing for days before demanding what little money the sisters had saved. Before we resume, tell us where you're listening, and if this tale impacts you, subscribe because I have something special for you tomorrow. The sisters never discussed how they had arrived in this remote corner of the Dakota Territory, how their father had fled Boston after embezzling from his business partners, how their mother had withered from illness and heartbreak in this unforgiving land, and how they had once been daughters of privilege, educated, and refined before disgrace had exiled them to this brutal frontier. Lizzie, Rebecca called from the window. "Father's coming with company." Elizabeth immediately buried the tin behind a loose floorboard as Catherine held Rebecca. Multiple horses thundered, rare for their father, who always returned alone, stumbling from his horse in an alcohol haze. Harold Miller was surrounded by two expensive-dressed men when the door smashed open. Elizabeth feared his bloodshot eyes' triumphant shine. Miller mumbled, "Girls, respect. Black Eagle mine owners Augustus Parker and William Crawford run the territory's most successful mine." Elizabeth remarked how both guys viewed them as goods, not individuals. Parker, the oldest, had a sun and ambition-worn face, a beautifully maintained silver-streaked beard against his costly suit. Crawford, about 35, stared at Rebecca too long with chilly eyes. "Good-looking gals, Miller," Parker said. "You say educated?" Miller boasted that he had sponsored the older two's Eastern schooling, not their mother's family. "Figures and drawing come naturally to youngest." Crawford noted the unusual fineness for this location. Slowly, Catherine circles. "They can cook, clean, and manage household accounts?" Elizabeth advanced. "Father, what's up?" Miller's face clouded. "These men need wives. Territory expands. They're building real homes. Need proper woman leaders." Elizabeth said, "We're not for sale," and her stomach sank. Parker chuckled, soundless, of humor. "Spirited, excellent. His last one was too mild and died after a year." "Last one?" Catherine muttered, pale. Crawford waved off, saying mining is taxing on fragile constitutions. "But you gals appear strong." Elizabeth guarded her sisters. "No separation. Don't need all three," Parker shrugged. "The oldest, please. Crawford likes the kid. Middle daughter can visit Jameson in Silver Crown. He's looking." "No." The word Elizabeth screamed made her father cringe. Miller held her arm and yanked her away, severely piercing into her flesh. He hissed alcohol fumes about her. "My debt to these men is unfathomable. My debts will be forgiven for you girls." "It's done, Elizabeth. Papers signed this morning." Although she realized the sad truth, she protested that you can't sell your girls. Perhaps he could in this lonely place with no law but men's agreements. "Already have," Miller said, releasing her arm. "You leave tomorrow. Pack up." After the men left, the sisters whispered in their modest bedroom. "We must run," Rebecca wailed. "Tonight. With what cash?" "To where?" Catherine asked pragmatically despite her dread. "Winter's coming. We wouldn't last a week." Elizabeth paced the little room. "Women die in mining camps. There, we'd never leave. Parker and Crawford have bodyguards, and Jameson may be worse." Catherine said, "I heard Crawford's last wife stories in town. They claim she survived, of any consumption." Rebecca's eyes widened in dread. "Then what?" "Enough." Elizabeth stopped to spare her little sister such darkness. "Need a plan?" Elizabeth decided as moonlight filled the window. "We'll take our money and head north to Pembina. Old school friend there." The sound of glass smashing interrupted her. After their father's angry speech, unexpected sounds came from the main room. Sisters froze, listening. "Changed my mind, Miller." Crawford's drink-soaked voice was harsh. "Why wait until morning? Let's see what I buy tonight." Elizabeth hurriedly pushed her sisters to the window. "Go now. To the creek bed. Stay in water to hide your track." "We'll stay," Catherine insisted. "Delay them, then follow," Elizabeth pledged. Rebecca, take the money tin. They wouldn't know Elizabeth retrieved her father's old gun from under the bed, unloaded, while her sisters grudgingly slipped through the window. Her location was near the bedroom door as it crashed open. Crawford stood, cheeks red from liquor and rage. Their father wobbled behind him. The other two where? Crawford insisted. Elizabeth answered, safe from you, lifting the weapon. Crawford chuckled. That ancient contraption hasn't fired in years. He advanced confidently. Father sold. Us once today, Elizabeth replied coldly. Curious he'd let you claim your property early for free. Words worked as intended. Crawford regarded Miller suspiciously. Is she honest? Trying to deceive me? Elizabeth moved toward the window while the men argued. Sisters could need her. They would face whatever came next together, but they would never be sold like cattle to these cruel men who considered women as expendable in their empire-building goals. Slipped, through the window into the chilly night air, heart racing, she rushed toward the creek where her sisters waited. The Dakota sky stretched overhead, stars dim. From the home behind her, violent shouts went up. Elizabeth understood the hard terrain. Survival was nearly impossible for three ladies. As she hugged her sisters, a strange sound came. Horses approaching from the north, not their home. Someone's coming, Catherine whispered. 5 riders appeared in the darkness as the sisters huddled under a huge cottonwood. The graceful outlines of people who lived in harmony with their mounts were unique from mining company guys. Lakota, Rebecca inhaled. Elizabeth clutched her sisters. Broken treaties and the discovery of gold in their sacred Black Hills had strained Lakota white settlers' relations. However, these horsemen were not advancing quickly like a war party. The youngest rider, about 20, struck Elizabeth as moonlight showed their faces. His piercing eyes fastened on the creek bottom. Her sisters heard her whisper, hiding place. They saw us. Stand tall, fearless. The sisters emerged from their hiding place as the riders neared, unsure if they'd escaped one danger only to face another in the hostile Dakota night. This narrative was time-consuming to prepare and tell. If you like it, subscribe to our channel. This is important to us. Returning to the tale, 5 Lakota riders formed a semicircle before the Miller sisters, their horses unnaturally motionless in the moonlight. The mid-30s leader, a broad-shouldered man with twin eagle feathers in his long black hair, lifted his hand in peace. You flee from something, he said in clear but accented English, not a question. While protecting her sisters, Elizabeth elevated her chin. We run our own business. The leader looked at her face without expression. He just said, 2 more men come, nodding toward the Miller farmhouse. Men with firearms rage. The sounds of pursuit reached them. Screaming, bushes crashing, Crawford's unique voice yelling threats into the darkness. The youngest Lakota rider who first saw them quickly spoke to the leader in their native language. Elizabeth couldn't comprehend the words, but the urgency was evident. The leader nodded and addressed Elizabeth again. I'm John Thunder Eagle. These are my brothers. The others were indicated with a hand sweep. Help is available. Why help us? Catherine inquired suspiciously. John's face grew black. We know these miners. Their impact on land and people. A gunshot rang out at night, uncomfortably close. Rebecca, flinching, pressed Elizabeth. Please, Elizabeth, decision taken. We appreciate your help. Each sister was placed onto a horse quickly. Elizabeth sat behind John Thunder Eagle as Catherine and Rebecca sat with his brothers. Rebecca's horse was carefully led by Benjamin Thunder Eagle, the youngest Lakota. John told them to hold fast, and the horses moved quickly and silently through the darkness. After riding north along the stream bed for over an hour, they turned east into a highly wooded area that would have been impossible without the Lakota brothers' understanding of the terrain. After a while, they reached a little clearing with a chimney smoking. John said their trading post was safe between realms as they dismounted. Inside, the cabin had an unexpected mix of cultures. Lakota quill work, painted buffalo hides, and American furniture and books coexisted. Lakota-speaking woman with intelligent eyes and silver-streaked black hair greeted them. John described our aunt, Mary Whitefeather. No English, yet she understands more than she claims. The aunt looked at the sisters intently before nodding and telling them to sit by the fire. After a tentative taste, Catherine identified the fragrant herbal tea as willow bark and mint. Elizabeth asked her long-awaited query while the brothers talked softly near the door. Why is this place yours? A trading post remote from civilization. Our father was part French trader, half Lakota, said Thomas Thunder Eagle, the middle brother in his late 22nd. We learned to cross worlds from him. When settlers arrived, he declared knowledge would protect us. Michael, the fourth brother, said their father taught them to hunt and track. Our Lakota grandfather passed on our customs. Our aunt taught us English reading and writing. Benjamin, the youngest, hesitated before approaching Rebecca. You're hurt. He pointed to her hurried arm scrape. Escape through the window. Rebecca looked astonished, having missed it in the chaos. No big deal. Mary Whitefeather brought a little clay pot of green paste, which he gently applied to Rebecca's scratch. Benjamin explained, looking at Rebecca with deep interest, that our aunt understands healing plants. After calming down, the sisters recounted their circumstances, their father's gambling debts, and the mine sale. John hardened as he interpreted for his aunt about the Baron's desperate flight. Parker, Crawford, and Jameson, mining men, ruin land, water, and people. Elizabeth saw your past dealings with them. Thomas said they tried to take our grandfather's farm last year. After papers and threats failed, they sent armed men. What happened? Catherine asks. Thomas smiled briefly. They found Lakota shadow warriors. When Mary spoke, John translated her words. These men think they own the world. Beautiful things are collected carelessly. Land, gold, ladies. We're not the first, Liz inquired softly. Men have acquired other women. John looked at Thomas before answering. 2 Swedish immigrants in April, 3 Cheyenne sisters last winter. Other stories have been told. What became of them? Catherine pressed, but her look suggested she knew the answer. Fever killed Swedish girls. Michael gently stated that the Cheyenne sisters vanished within months. Crawford said they fled. Rebecca shivered. Would that have been our fate? Nobody needed to reply. After sitting on pallets by the fire, the sisters whispered. Can we trust them? Catherine inquired pragmatically. Elizabeth said they risked helping strangers. That matters. Rebecca blushed as she said Benjamin is kind. Elizabeth grinned despite their perilous situation. Beauty and kindness always attracted Rebecca, even in the worst conditions. We must proceed tomorrow. These miners won't quit. Father signed documents. Going where? Catherine's query lingered. Pembina remains our best alternative, Elizabeth decided. Further north, the mining corporation doesn't control it. With caution, we have enough money to start afresh. Catherine nodded slowly. The Prescotts may house us till we settle. Sarah Prescott and I corresponded until last year. A hushed meeting was interrupted. John crouched close them to avoid frightening them. He whispered, My brothers followed your pursuit. They returned to the mining camp but are gathering a larger morning search party. Return prizes are offered. We have how long? Elizabeth asks. Their circles will grow from your homestead at dawn. John looked serious. We can help you reach Pembina, but slowly. 3 or 4 days if we avoid main trails. Elizabeth glanced at her sisters. Why risk so much for us? Long silence from John. My granddad taught us that everything is connected. Land changes affect individuals. Mining workers poisoned both. Elizabeth liked his straightforwardness. She saw mining destroy pristine landscapes in Dakota Territory for 3 years. Operations removed trees, diverted and muddy waterways, and drove wildlife away. The same ruthless practices that brutalized the soil seemed to brutalize its leaders. She planned to leave at dawn. John nodded assent. I'll lead you with my brothers. Mary stays. This place must appear normal if searched. After he left, Rebecca murmured, Benjamin, the youngest sibling, draws like me. He showed me flying eagle sketches. Catherine grinned. Lizzie, Thomas was watching you. Different from Crawford. Different. Elizabeth ignored her sister's observation, but noted Thomas Thunder Eagle's serious glance. Safety is our goal. Nothing else matters now. Elizabeth thought about how rapidly things may change as she fell asleep. Yesterday, they were 3 helpless sisters enslaved by their cruel father. Tonight, they found surprising allies and a tenuous route forward. Outside, the wind carried a faraway wolf howl. Mary Whitefeather, waking by the dwindling fire, glanced up sharply. She moved to the window and read texts in the dark. She looked worried as she added another log to the fire. The next days will challenge them all in ways they never imagined. As the Thunder Eagle brothers prepared for the voyage, dawn broke in a pink and gold paint wash over the eastern horizon. James, the second eldest brother who had been quiet all night, organized supplies quietly. He gave each sister a little knapsack and told them to travel light. Take only what you need. Elizabeth noticed how the brothers dressed differently this morning. Native components that could draw attention were removed. They wore utilitarian frontier hunter and trapper clothes, only eagle feathers tied discreetly. John and Thomas's hair revealed their ancestry. Before leaving, Mary Whitefeather slipped a little leather purse into Catherine's hands and hugged each sister. As his aunt spoke, John interpreted medicines. She claims you can use them. Catherine looked shocked. How does she know? Benjamin said she spotted your T identification last night. She claims you have healers. Michael emerged from scouting with a frown. Mining camp riders, 8 men coming this route. They're following our last night trail. How is that possible? Elizabeth asks. We took care. Harold Miller is with them, Michael said. Father knows this area well. Elizabeth's heart fell. Her father would seek too. His gambling debts wouldn't be pardoned if sisters escaped. He needed their captivity to live. John gave quick orders. Thomas, lead the sisters north down Pine Creek Ravine. I, James, Michael, and Benjamin will lay false trails. Meet at Broken Hawk Ridge around sunset. He said, Thomas is our best pathfinder. Before anyone could object. Smaller groups go faster. Within minutes, Thomas led the 3 sisters into the woodland in single file. They utilized every trick Thomas knew to hide their path, kept rocky ground, and crossed streams often. Elizabeth, striving to keep up with Thomas's confidence, questioned, How did your family settle? Thomas looked back, softening between worlds. The treaty negotiations 20 years ago were translated by our father, William Thunder Eagle. He anticipated and prepared us. Elizabeth noted that you learned both worlds. Thomas nods. He stated we must be like water, able to flow around obstructions, freeze or evaporate, and wear away stone with tenacity. From behind, Catherine asked your mother. Thomas was shadowed. When Benjamin was born, she died. The winters lasted 12 after that. They silently moved north into rougher terrain. Thomas led them into a tiny canyon with a fast brook over moss-covered boulders about lunchtime. We rest here, he said, pointing to a tiny clearing by the water. Thomas climbed a rocky crag to survey their backtrack for 15 minutes while the sisters gratefully submerged. Rebecca softly told Catherine and Elizabeth about your brother Benjamin. I learned their Lakota name is Wakinyantanka, meaning Thunder Eagle. A revered medicine man was their grandfather. A brief talk taught you a lot. With sisterly teasing, Elizabeth watched. Rebecca reddened. Soft-spoken, he says a lot. Thomas descended and divided dried beef from his pack with them. Mining companies. Elizabeth accepted. Her share. They sought your grandfather's land. How did you stop them? Thomas pondered her before responding. We demonstrated that paper laws aren't all. You fought? Catherine queried worriedly. Nothing with bullets, Thomas said. With knowledge, mining operations depend on supply channels, water, and willing workforce. All can be interrupted. Elizabeth got it right away. You sabotaged them. Thomas showed a little smile. Restoring balance is our preferred term. The talk stopped when Thomas strained and tilted his head to listen. He motioned for them to get their stuff and follow him deeper into the ravine without speaking. The sisters went quickly, following Thomas's whispered orders through a thin rock wall crack. The passage led to a small cave hidden from the ravine. Stay here, he whispered. No sound. Thomas glided back into the passage, appearing to blend into the stone. Sisters listened in the damp darkness. After many breathless minutes, they heard what Thomas had heard. Voices reverberating against the ravine walls, metal clinks, horses' feet on stone. A loud voice ordered spread. Crawford, they're nearby. Miller swears they went this way. Why would they come up here? Another voice groused. Only woods for 50 miles. Found something? Third voice called. Fresh water tracks? Elizabeth worried her racing heart might reveal their whereabouts. Catherine held her hand tightly while Rebecca trembled against her other side. Sir, as they followed their trail, the search party's sounds faded as they moved upstream. When the sisters felt secure breathing again, footsteps approached their hiding location. Thomas returned through the passage. They detected one of my brother's deceptions. Away from our path. You knew this how? Place existed? Catherine inquired after leaving the cave. Our grandfather taught us all these hills hiding spots. Thomas replied, Our last war with the U.S. Army, these caves protected us, continued their journey. Thomas drove harder to reach their destination before nightfall, maneuvering even more cautiously. Late afternoon weariness plagued the sisters. Rebecca, youngest and smallest, struggled. Without reply, Thomas put her onto his back and walked as if he had nothing. Rebecca pleaded, "I can walk. Save your strength," Thomas said. The hardest thing follows. Getting up a steeper ridge that seemed inaccessible was the hardest part. Thomas guided each sister up the hazardous climb by showing them invisible handholds and footholds. Broken Hawk Ridge gave a spectacular vista from the peak. Mines were visible to the southwest, with ugly gouges in the dirt, denuded hillsides, and tailings-filled streams. Elizabeth pointed to Parker's soldiers returning to camp. Thomas squinted his gaze at these horsemen. "They've stopped searching today. Tomorrow, more men will return. How could you know?" Thomas just said, "I'd do that," when Catherine asked. "They'll recruit trackers from other mines and pay more." John and his brothers appeared from the woodland below and climbed quickly to join them on the crest as the first stars appeared in the eastern sky. With delight, Michael said we led them on a good chase. According to James, Parker's men went 10 miles west, Crawford's went east, and Father, Elizabeth asked quietly, returned to the mining camp with Crawford. He looked ill. Elizabeth struggled with her feelings for the damaged father. John observed the group before booze and desperation twisted him, and relief that he was no longer following them. We gained a day or two, but our Pembina journey is only beginning. As night fell, the brothers built a modest camp with a smokeless fire in a rocky valley that would never be seen. James gave them dried meat, fruit, and cornmeal cakes equally. Benjamin sat next to Rebecca, making stick drawings in the dirt. "Eagle's Pass," he said, pointing ahead. "Dakota Territory ends here. Mining interests have little power beyond." John emphasized that some dangers were greater. People who live without laws don't care about borders. Thomas watched Elizabeth across the fire, his countenance unreadable in the flickering light. He didn't look away when they met. He decided to sit next to her. "You should sleep," he whispered. "Your strength will be tested tomorrow. Will we reach Pembina?" "Too fatigued for pretense," she begged. Thomas remained mute. "I think you will temporarily." Elizabeth was troubled by his wording. "Say you, not us." Thomas surveyed the pitch-black terrain. "Mining workers have personalized this. Once you're secure, my brothers and I have unfinished business with them." Suddenly, Elizabeth understood. "You use our getaway. Uncover for another." A smile briefly lit up his grim face. "Elizabeth Miller, you see much." Elizabeth observed her sisters. Catherine talking to Michael about the region's therapeutic herbs, and Rebecca showing Benjamin her small sketchbook that she'd kept safe during their trip as the fire burnt down to embers. Despite their hardships, they connected. Elizabeth wondered what they would find in Pembina, and if they were heading towards safety or another peril. The Thunder Eagle brothers were comrades, but their secret agenda implied levels Elizabeth couldn't yet understand. The Milky Way was a steady, ancient river of stars, unaffected by human dramas. The second day of their trek brought them to unfamiliar terrain for the Miller sisters. The forested hills gave way to windswept plateaus with old rock formations perched against the Dakota sky. Eagles circled overhead, their piercing cries booming across the lonely terrain. John Thunder Eagle explained Eagle Nation as they paused on a sacred peak. Today's group traveled differently. John and James led, with Michael scouting ahead. While Catherine and Rebecca accompanied Benjamin, Thomas led Elizabeth behind his brothers. Elizabeth told Thomas, "You're surrounded. You've protected us." Thomas nodded to acknowledge her view. "Mining firms have local informants. Gunfire doesn't always signal danger." Elizabeth saw Catherine talking to Michael, who had rejoined, as they dropped into a narrow valley. Her usually reticent sister animatedly pointed to plants along the way. Thomas commented, following Elizabeth's gaze, that your sister's botanical expertise surprised Michael. "He keeps our family medication." Elizabeth said her mother taught Catherine. She believed all women should learn healing. "Just a sensible woman," Thomas said. They moved quickly all morning, halting very infrequently. By midday, they reached a strange structure where enormous stones formed a natural shelter behind an overhanging cliff after refilling water packs at a clean spring. John said we rest. James has advanced to preserve our path. Clear. Benjamin made modest amounts of pemmican, a rich concoction of dried meat, fat, and berries that supplied surprising nutrition as they rested under the overhang. Elizabeth noted his care to ensure Rebecca received her part before taking his. Elizabeth told Thomas while they ate that your brothers appear to know where we're heading. Our getaway path wasn't yours. After studying her, Thomas said, "You've traveled it before. This trail links sacred sites of our people, also used by persons who want to go undetected by territorial authorities." "Smugglers?" Catherine inquired, joining in. John said, "Some call them that. Others may allege they're relocating commodities without paying unjust taxes to a government that claims land it never owned." Elizabeth pondered. These tradesmen aided your family." Thomas clarified that we assist. A safe journey. On occasion, sanctuary. James returned distressed, interrupting their relaxation. "Riders ahead, no minors." John frowned at boundary runners. "How many?" "6 well-armed men camped at Thunder Basin in our path." Brotherly glances spoke much without words. "Who run boundaries?" Becca asked softly. Benjamin's young face hardened. "Bounties hunters, fugitive prisoners, army deserters, runaway wives, anyone with a price." "Would they know us?" Elizabeth asked, her gut constricting with fear. "Crawford and Parker may have disseminated reward rumors." John replied grimly. "They have territory-wide contacts. Can we bypass them?" A suggestion from Catherine. Shaking his head, James, "We must travel 2 days longer. The only other northbound route crosses open land where we'd be visible for miles." John weighed options. "We must confront them. Face the risk, rather than flee into worse terrain." "Face them," Elizabeth repeated. "Unbelievable, 6 armed men are about to capture or kill us." Thomas corrected without waiting. "They're unaware of our arrival. That benefits us." John's concept was so outrageous that Elizabeth thought he was joking. Thomas and Benjamin would lead the sisters to the border runners camp as a genuine travel group. John, James, and Michael discreetly positioned themselves around the camp. "Men respect 2 things, strength and profit," John said. "Both will be offered." "Maybe they recognize us from descriptions," Catherine asks. Thomas told her they won't. Mining firm business is too complicated for boundary runners. They prefer simple bounties. "What if they take us anyway?" Elizabeth persisted. John seemed coldly assured. "They will then learn why the Lakota were the most feared plains warriors." At dusk, they neared Thunder Basin, a vast earth depression still lit. 6 horses picketed around a big fire where men passed bottles and played cards as the day faded. Thomas and Benjamin looked different again. They now dressed like affluent frontier traders with guns and confidence. The sisters were told to follow their lead precisely. Thomas said, "Remember, you're mine," as they descended near the camp. Benjamin's sister and betrothed Elizabeth, Catherine, and Rebecca. "We're going to Catherine's Pembina wedding." Elizabeth nodded, trying to calm her rushing heart. The border runners saw their approach instantly, hands moving to guns, before recognizing their guests' methodical, unthreatening pace. Thomas called hail the camp when they were nearby. "We want to share your nighttime fire." The biggest boundary runner, a bearded man with a scar on his left cheek, greeted them. "State your business, travelers." Nathan read. Thomas presented himself with a little Eastern accent, unlike his usual speech. "Clara, Samuel, and his sister and betrothed. We traveled to Pembina for her wedding." The scarred man suspiciously examined them. Thomas replied simply that the country is dangerous for ladies, hence our armed guard. "We can trade stuff for your fire." The boundary runners were intrigued by this proposition. In this lonely area, booze, tobacco, and ammo were crucial trail supplies. Leader waved them forward. "Show me your trade." Thomas opened a little pouch to show better tobacco than on the frontier. "Sample of our items." Thomas's bargaining showed his exceptional ability to change personas. He negotiated their right to camp close for tobacco and 2 little bottles of liquor with good-natured resolve. Elizabeth remained silent as directed, but watched the boundary runners. These men were dangerous, continuously assessing value and vulnerability, and their talk deliberately concealed their business and destinations. Most worrisome was their youngest party member, who watched Rebecca with undisguised fascination. The groups kept separate flames but chatted. Thomas was skilled at giving just enough information to appear forthcoming without exposing anything crucial. Benjamin guarded Rebecca, knowing of the young boundary runner's attention. "Wedding in Pembina?" the scarred commander inquired during a lull. "Odd timing with winter approaching. My brother-in-law is impatient." Thomas smiled conspiratorially. "And the lady's father wanted the match formalized." When dads were mentioned, Elizabeth tensed, but the boundary runner laughed. "That's usual?" Fathers proud to give their daughters. As darkness fell across the basin, boundary runners became drunker. Their new whiskey made their discourse harsher and gestures more expansive. The child became more confident around Rebecca. He called across camps, "Pretty little thing. Too good for a half-breed dealer." Though Elizabeth observed Benjamin clench his knife hand, his demeanor was bland. Thomas stepped in smoothly. "My brother's fiancée is exhausted from our trip. We're retiring." A youthful boundary runner stood unsteadily. Maybe she'd rather be with real men tonight. The tension sparked like lightning. Elizabeth noticed Thomas subtly reach for his weapon. Before things got worse, an owl called from the dark. 3 fast hoots alerted the boundary runner's leader. "Someone's there." A different owl called from opposite, scarred. He cursed, pulling his gun. "Surrounded. Not by us," Thomas responded calmly. His fake accent vanished. The young boundary runner's face contorted in wrath as I suggested you reconsider your companion's interest in my brother's girlfriend. "You lied." A deadly-looking arrow struck his feet, ending his words. "Ah, they. Next one finds your heart," John said from the darkness. The border runners froze, realizing their hazardous situation. Thomas continued with the authority of a commander, "We mean no trouble. We'll leave daybreak. But know that we safeguard these women. Men who threaten them tonight will not see tomorrow's sun." Through his booze haze, the scarred leader cautiously lowered his rifle, calculating odds. "No arguments, stranger." Man spoke out of turn. Elizabeth was astonished by this conversation. Perfect cooperation and trust let the Thunder Eagle brothers turn a deadly confrontation into a grudging ceasefire. Thomas murmured, "Sleep in shifts," as the boundary runners retired to their side of the basin. "We leave before dawn, under the vast starry sky." Surrounded by danger but protected by these remarkable brothers who moved between worlds with such fluid grace, Elizabeth finally allowed herself to contemplate what she had begun to feel for Thomas Thunder Eagle. Admiration growing into something deeper and unexpected. She was positive that their meeting with the Thunder Eagle family had profoundly transformed her and her sister's lives, not because they escaped, but because they found strength they didn't have. Knowing she had, they left Thunder Basin in the murky pre-dawn light with hushed urgency. The border runners slept or carefully seemed to be asleep in their bedrolls. As the sisters and their defenders withdrew into the mist, only their leader stared through slitted eyes. John was relentless. He said during a water break that we must keep our distance from the basin. When waking, those men will be curious. Elizabeth saw the brothers in their most alert formation, John and James ahead, Michael to the sides, Thomas escorting the sisters, and Benjamin guarding their backup. "Do you believe they knew us?" Catherine expressed the worry that had kept Elizabeth up all night. Thomas remarked that these were valuable women traveling with Lakota men, not the Miller sisters. That's enough to intrigue them. The scenery altered drastically as they headed north. Tall grass covered rolling slopes that swirled like water in the strong wind replaced the austere plateaus. They reached a big, fast-flowing river around mid-morning. "The North Fork," John said. "Territory boundary." Elizabeth surveyed the churning water with concern. "We cross how?" John pointed upstream to the river's narrowing between 2 rocky outcroppings. "Stone Sisters Crossing." James started unpacking rope from his gear. "Creating a line stabilizes us. The water is deep yet only chest-high, despite the powerful current." While the brothers prepared for the crossing, Rebecca approached Elizabeth with remarkable solemnity. "Lizzie," she whispered, "I need to tell you about Benjamin." Elizabeth fretted. Her youngest sister had always been perceptive and saw Rebecca and the youngest Thunder Eagle brother growing closer. "What's it, Becca?" He described mining businesses, how they've treated Lakotas. Rebecca looked distressed despite her gentleness. "So much worse than expected." Benjamin was helping Michael tie the guiding rope when Elizabeth looked up. "He told you what?" "The Black Eagle mine, Mr. Parker's business. It rests on their grandfather's special prayer grounds. The territorial authorities stole the silver the mining business found 3 years ago." Rebecca trembled in anger. Parker's men beat their grandfather for protesting. 1 month later, he died from injuries. Elizabeth thought the ground had changed. "Benjamin informed you?" Rebecca nods. "That's why they've disrupted mining activities, as you discussed with Thomas last night. Justice, not sabotage." Before Elizabeth could react, Thomas called the crossing ready. The revelation was delayed. Elizabeth found crossing the North Fork harder than expected. The river's smooth stones were unsteady, and the surging water tore at her legs. Thomas's steady grasp and the guiding rope kept her from being swept downstream. Halfway across, Catherine slipped on a submerged boulder. Michael immediately held her as they reconnected the rope. Elizabeth saw her sister's face flush with more than exertion as Michael guided her to land. Rebecca, the smallest and lightest, struggled most. After watching her fight the stream, Benjamin pulled her onto his back and carried her the rest, his massive frame barely impacted by the water. After crossing, they dried their clothes as best they could. Late October sun supplied little warmth, and Elizabeth worried about infection from their sodden clothes. Thomas addressed this issue unprompted. "Trapper's hut is 2 hours north. We can relax and dry." Elizabeth walked with John while Thomas scouted ahead as they resumed their journey. "Softly, Rebecca informed me about your grandfather." John's face was impassive, but his eyes showed grief or rage. "Benjamin shouldn't have told that story," he said. "Why not? Don't we deserve to know why you're helping?" Several steps later, John answered after studying her. "We help because it's right. Our burden, not yours." "But it explains much," Elizabeth insisted. "Knowledge of mining activities, determination to undermine them. This goes beyond rescuing 3 women. You fight your own war." John smiled slightly. "Thomas claimed you see more than most. Does your approach against mining firms include us?" Elizabeth inquired directly. "Originally? Yes," John said. "Your flight causes confusion, wastes resources, and tarnishes their reputation, but now—" He looked at his brothers, each watching their sister. "I think our motivations are more convoluted now." Elizabeth saw his meaning and followed his eyes. The sisters and brothers' relationship went beyond strategic partnership into something unexpected. "After your grandfather died, what happened?" Her request was gentle. The face of John stiffened. "Mining firms grew. More land obtained. More precious sites lost. They forced our people from ancient lands. Resistors vanished or perished in accidents. Nobody in authority helped? The authorities?" John laughed without humor. "The territorial judge owned Parker's stock. Crawford and the U.S. Marshal drink. Elizabeth, this is the border. Whoever has authority defines law." Elizabeth pondered this harsh fact. She said her father moved in circles where legality mattered in Boston, until his misdeeds showed how cash could buy favor. The territorial illusion of justice was even thinner. She switched topics to the trapper's cabin. "Your other ally?" John nods. "Jacob Holloway, former Army Scout, married Crow. A guy between worlds." They reached the cabin early afternoon, a strong building near a tiny river in a cottonwood grove. A tall, grizzled man with a gray beard approached with a rifle, waiting to recognize John. He greeted Thunder Eagle. "Unexpected company. Holloway," John said. "We seek refuge briefly." Trapper surveyed the ragged gang. His acute eyes noticed the sisters' eastern bearing despite their mess. "A mining company?" he inquired. John responded. One nod from Holloway. "You're welcome. While wife visits her people, stew is in the pot and space to dry by the fire." Inside the cabin showed a wonderful mix of cultures. Hanging cured animal pelts with beautiful beading. Trapping tools coexisted with crow articles. European novels sat beside parfleche containers. "Your wife is Crow, not Lakota." Catherine watched Holloway pour them excellent venison stew. "Are there no historical conflicts among your peoples?" Trapper smiled. "If all locals face the same peril, tribal distinctions are irrelevant. I and Morning Sky knew that first." Holloway told the boys something as they ate, causing alarm. Men from Crawford passed. He reported asking about 3 sisters traveling north and promising large rewards 3 days earlier. 3 days ago? Thomas frowned. "That's impossible. We escaped 4 days ago, and they were looking in the wrong direction." Holloway said, "They would not know your route until told." A chill hit Elizabeth. It had nothing to do with her soaking garments. How would they know we'd go to Pembina? They might not. James spoke from the window. "Maybe they're barring all northern routes." Holloway nodded attentively. "They've been thorough, visiting every village, stationing men at river crossings, unusually determined for Crawford." "You're not telling us, Mr. Holloway?" Elizabeth questioned, reading Trapper reluctance. Holloway inspected her before responding. "Crawford claims these sisters took something expensive, something essential." "That's ludicrous, Catherine," protested. "Only our mother's jewelry and our clothes were brought." "Yes, more." Holloway proceeded hesitantly. He says one of you killed a man escaping. Astonished, the sisters looked at him. That's a lie, Elizabeth insisted. We did no harm. Someone did, Holloway said. Crawford's. The morning after your departure, Foreman was found dead. Backshot. Implications loomed heavy in the room. Crawford went for more than runaway property. He sought killers. Frontier justice rarely demanded evidence for such claims. If directed at women with native males, Benjamin came from examining their backtrack with a grimace as the sisters processed this news. He announced Southern riders. 6 heavily armed men moved quickly. The boundary runners, Thomas said. They must have recognized the sisters. Holloway quickly grabbed extra ammunition and a second firearm from a cabinet for his age. He pulled up a rug to discover a trap door to a root cellar below. John shook his head. Won't hold you all but the women. Holloway, we can't involve you. I involved myself when I married Morning Sky, the trapper said evenly. Select swiftly. They'll arrive shortly. Elizabeth made her choice while the brothers conferred quickly in Lakota. She spoke frantically, pressing Catherine and Rebecca close. We can't run forever. We're endangering the Thunder Eagles with these men's persistence. Your suggestion? Catherine inquired, however her expression implied. She was aware. Elizabeth, shoulders straightened. It's time to fight back individually. Boston girls are no longer helpless. For the first time since their perilous journey, Elizabeth felt something beyond fear and gratitude. A blazing determination that their pursuers would soon realize was as dangerous as the Thunder Eagle's arrows. Without root cellar, Elizabeth bluntly told the Thunder Eagle boys, no hiding while you risk yourself for us again. Thomas appeared ready to argue, but Elizabeth's glance stopped him. You suggest what? Instead, he asked. Elizabeth said we use their expectations against them, her mind churning with ideas. These men deem us defenseless ladies and precious goods. Show them otherwise. Holloway's wrinkled face smiled unexpectedly. Miss, I admire your ideas, like Early Sky. They used surprise and misdirection to avoid conflict with the boundary runners as they approached quickly. Holloway's cabin, built with frontier survivor weary, had strategic advantages, several escapes, defensible positions, and carefully positioned windows to watch for oncoming enemies. A boundary runner works, Holloway said. You for profit, not passion, as they prepared. Show them this work isn't worth it and they'll hunt easier prey. Catherine, who had kept silent during planning, spoke up. My suggestion may help. She took a little packet of dried leaves, stinging nettle, and devil's club from her medical pouch. Burned smoke irritates eyes and confuses. Michael now respected her. How should we use it? Catherine said to put it near the chimney. Add it to the fire when they surround the cabin. Both the chimney and cabin wall cracks will spew smoke. Those nearby will be briefly blinded. Perfect, Elizabeth nodded. That benefits us. Moving quickly, they positioned themselves throughout the cabin. The sisters declined to be locked in the rear room. Elizabeth positioned herself near the front glass with Holloway's spare weapon. Catherine prepped her smoke weapon by the fireplace, while Rebecca, to everyone's astonishment, offered to be bait. She explained with unusual grit, anticipating terrified women. Let them witness one and realize their error. Benjamin is worried about this strategy. However, assisted Rebecca stand near the front entrance so she could be seen through the glass as alone and vulnerable. They heard horses approaching within minutes. Holloway watched intently. 6 men, the scarred Thunder Basin leader and his crew, appeared through a shutter gap as Benjamin reported. Rebecca positioned herself to appear scared and alone. John and James hid by the back exit. Thomas and Benjamin covered the side windows. Michael and Catherine behind the fireplace, while Elizabeth crouched under the front window with a pistol. Boundary runners approached with the relaxed confidence of men used to winning. The leader dismounted first, signaling 2 to circle back while the other 3 approached the front door. Scarred man named Trapper, in business with your guests. When no one responded, he pointed to his friends. View the windows. Rebecca hunkered at the front window as a menacing man approached. Boss, got a sister. Probably the youngest, the leader smiled. Excellent, expel her. As the boundary runner raised his pistol to break the window, Rebecca looked at him without fear. He hesitated, confused by her shift. Now! Elizabeth shouted. Catherine placed her herbs on the fire, which immediately emitted thick, pungent smoke via the chimney and cabin's strategic apertures. Thomas and Benjamin simultaneously fired warning shots that split wood inches from the boundary. Runners' locations and confusion unfolded as planned. The border runners, expecting easy prey, were attacked from all sides while choking on smoke. Two men staggered, scratching their eyes. Another shoots wildly at the cabin. John and James fought the ringed men from the cabin's rear, shouting. Elizabeth heard fists hitting flesh in a tremendous thump. Scarred and more seasoned than his men, the leader dove behind a water trough. "A trap!" yelled. "Fall back!" Elizabeth took advantage. She rose, pointed her pistol at the water trough, and fired precisely, sending splinters flying above the leader's head. She said, "The next one finds your skull," in a commanding tone she had never used before the frontier. "Until you argue, we have no issue. Leave now." After several stressful heartbeats, the outcome was uncertain. From below the trough, the leader's voice was strained but calculated. "Our payment? Crawford's providing $500 for you three. Crawford blamed us for his foreman's murder," Elizabeth replied. "Bold falsehood, easily blown. He may kill you if you deliver us. Avoid trouble." A pause followed this statement. Elizabeth could almost feel the commander reassessing the situation, outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and possibly betrayed by his client. "Stay away from us," Elizabeth said, pushing her advantage. "Do that to live. In the future, we won't be so merciful." John and James appeared from the cabin's rear with a boundary runner, unconscious and bleeding from the head. They unceremoniously dragged him before his friends. "Your man will recover," said John. "Consider him a goodwill gesture. Grab him and go." The battered commander emerged from the trough, hands raised in surrender. "His job lost its appeal," he murmured. Crawford didn't mention Lakota warriors or battle-ready ladies. Elizabeth remained focused as the boundary runners took their injured buddy to their horses. After they were far out of range, she dropped the pistol, her hands quivering from tension. "You did good," Thomas said near her. Most men would have failed under pressure. Elizabeth said she was shocked, studying the weapon in her palm with pride and bewilderment. Catherine was already treating James, who had been knifed during the brief scuffle at the rear door, inside the cabin. Rebecca stood by the window, watching the boundary runners go, her face showing confidence. Holloway shrugged at his cabin's modest damage, planned to replace that shutter anyway. John assured himself that they wouldn't return while cleaning his knife. They spot a terrible deal. Elizabeth evaluated their win. "We addressed one problem, but Crawford's murder charge changes everything. We can't disappear into Pembina. Territory-wide hunting awaits us. Thomas agreed that we need evidence of Crawford's foreman's murder to clear your names. You can only obtain that by returning." Elizabeth grasped the weight of the thought hitting her. Catherine gazed back toward the mining camp, worried. "Not directly," Thomas explained, "but close enough to investigate. Our allies are miners who hate Crawford's methods and townspeople who fear him, but may talk if protected." Benjamin, staring at Rebecca, said it was too dangerous. "More hazardous than lifelong murderer hunts?" Elizabeth counted. "If we reach Pembina with this accusation, we'll never be safe or free." A protracted debate ensued about whether to continue north or turn back to face the false accusation. Elizabeth detected a small change in sister-brother dynamics throughout. They were now allies in a common cause. A fresh strategy emerged at dusk. Silverton, Crawford's nearest mining village, was within reach as they continued to Pembina. Thomas and Elizabeth would search for evidence to disprove the murder charge while the others created a Pembina safe haven. "We go at dawn," John decided. "The boundary runners gave us a break, but Crawford's men will catch up." Elizabeth watched the sunset with Thomas on Holloway's modest porch as the others dressed for the journey. Thomas said, "You're not who I thought you were when we met," and Elizabeth answered, "I thought you were wild savages, and you thought I was a weak Eastern lady." Thomas grinned slightly. "We were both mistaken, yet here we are, determined and hopeful, to face one of the territory's most powerful men." "We have more," Thomas whispered. "Truth and each other exist." The simple sentence held ramifications neither could completely comprehend. For now, standing side by side and watching the dusk fall over the frontier that had shaped them unexpectedly was enough. Rebecca drew Crawford, Parker, and the boundary runners by lamplight in the cabin, faces they needed to avoid or confront. Catherine and Michael searched Holloway's herb stores for medicinal packets for the journey, sometimes brushing their hands and smiling briefly. The desperate flight was becoming a mission of justice no one could have imagined. They retreated into the darkness 3 nights before, but Holloway's cabin was illuminated by a pink-gold light that belied their judgments. The trapper woke up early to prepare dried deer, maize cakes, and a tea blend Catherine helped make from his herb supplies for their voyage. Through Swift Creek Pass, Holloway, this route heads northeast, explained, tracing a rudimentary map across the table. Though longer than the Pembina path, it's on high ground with fantastic visibility. John focused on the map. And Silverton? How do we approach unseen? Holloway showed a woodland ridge. Near the village, miners' huts cluster. Crawford's central office is near the assay. The best viewing spot is this ridge, close yet off patrol routes. Their strategy changed overnight. They would go together to a sheltered valley 3 miles from Silverton instead of splitting off. Thomas and Elizabeth would then explore the settlement while the others set up camp. Just 2 days, John insisted. If nothing is found, we go to Pembina to clear your identities legally. Elizabeth saw Catherine and Michael talking attentively near the cabin's rear entrance while making last preparations. Her normally reticent sister had become more confident and vocal in recent days. She witnessed Catherine give Michael several little packets, undoubtedly pharmaceutical materials from her job the night before. Rebecca gently said, "She's found her match," joining Elizabeth. Possibly, Elizabeth acknowledged. Despite these unusual dating settings, Rebecca's expression became serious. "Our lives have changed since Father's disgrace. Maybe we can make something true from all the lies." Elizabeth looked surprised at her youngest sister. A wise young woman was replacing the naive girl who fled Boston. "How about you and Benjamin?" Elizabeth inquired gently. Rebecca blushed. "He sees what others miss. Small moments of beauty, not just tracks and signs. He showed me how to hear wind through pine needles last night. Each species sings differently." Thomas made an exceptionally serious expression before Elizabeth could react. "Pause, Elizabeth." They paused under a huge cottonwood a short distance from the cabin. Thomas struggled with his words, odd for a controlled man. He concluded that our Silverton effort is risky. Elizabeth said it's vital. Yes, so he hesitated and continued quietly. "If something happens to me, pledge to go to Pembina. Your sisters need you." Elizabeth examined his powerful features and vigilant gaze, which had guided them through many dangers. She replied, "If something happens to me," a shadow crossed his face, "I won't consider that." The single declaration sat between them. Both were unwilling to completely articulate their meaning. Their escape from Holloway's cabin was quick. The trapper would stay behind to deceive pursuers. He placed a dark wood bear in Elizabeth's hand before they left. He said morning sky people think the bear gives courage to those who honor it. Though watchful, the sheltered valley trip went smoothly. They set their camp in a dense pine and aspen grove by mid-afternoon. A little creek provided fresh water, while natural rock formations protected from the harsh November wind. Elizabeth and Thomas prepared for Silverton in the evening. They traveled light, without extra equipment that could slow them or identify them as outsiders, and dressed in plain, practical clothing that would blend in a mining village. As they prepared, John advised them to leave observation only. Do not confront Crawford's soldiers. Thomas confirmed 2 days. We return to Pembina if nothing is found. Elizabeth clung to her sisters longer than necessary. Stay aware. Listen to John. Others too. Be careful, Catherine whispered. Crossing Crawford is perilous. Rebecca placed a folded paper in Elizabeth's hand. She cryptically advised opening it for memory. After finishing preparations, Elizabeth and Thomas left camp as darkness fell. Thomas led them by moonlight with the confidence of a night reader. He said they'd reach the observation point by sunrise as they traversed the rough terrain. After resting today, enter Silverton tomorrow evening when the miners return. How will we acquire data? Elizabeth asks. We cannot immediately question Crawford's guys about the crime. Thomas answered mining camps have their own knowledge. Salons, laundresses, storekeepers, those who see but aren't seen. The night passed with little conversation but increased synchronicity. Elizabeth realized she was used to frontier movement, placing her feet cautiously, balancing on uneven ground, and being alert of her surroundings. Boston society's niceties felt ancient. As promised, they reached the Silverton Ridge as dawn broke. A village stretched below them, a jumble of wooden structures dominated by the ore mill. Even early, the big chimney smoked. Mining continued. Thomas took her to a depression with tall trees for cover and windbreak. he continued, unpacking the tiny oilskin with their rations. "We'll rest here today." Elizabeth touched Rebecca's paper while she sat on a log. She cautiously unfolded it and found a little, wonderful sketch of Elizabeth, captured in a moment of determination during their confrontation with the boundary runners. Under the image, Rebecca wrote, "Who we become matters more than who we were." Thomas noticed the drawing over her shoulder and said, "Your sister is talented." Elizabeth said she always has, carefully folding the paper. "This differs from her Boston scenes. Now the lines are stronger. The border alters individuals," Thomas said. "Some it breaks, others discloses." Through Thomas's little spyglass, they observed Silverton, noting activity patterns, key buildings, and Crawford's office, a ZIA, large structure with a two-sided porch. Many personnel came and went with document pouches or equipment. Their strategy was developed by late afternoon. Elizabeth visited the settlement's modest general store where ladies were frequent and chatter flowed. Thomas watched the tavern where miners spoke more freely after drinking. Thomas thought Crawford's foreman died 3 nights earlier. The experience will be fresh in minds. They prepared to enter the settlement separately at dusk. Elizabeth had put her hair harshly under a basic bonnet and wore her most practical outfit, showing no education or sophistication. Thomas advised returning to this position promptly if threatened. "No waiting for me. Elizabeth asked you." "I've passed through settlements like these many times," he told her. "I'll be all right." Thomas shocked her by holding her hand before leaving. "Be careful, Elizabeth Miller. Now you're—" He stopped, uncertain of his remarks. "Important to all." The simple statement had much hidden meaning. Elizabeth squeezed his hand in thanks and turned towards Silverton and the man who had tried to buy her and her sisters like cattle. Elizabeth contemplated her incredible voyage as she dipped near the settlement's dispersed lights. She escaped in terror less than a week ago, just knowing she had to save her sisters. She was taking a risk to clear their reputations and seek justice for wrongs that went beyond their personal pain. Thomas stood behind her till she disappeared amid the first buildings, his expression showing worry beyond their goal. Then he descended, following a different route to the settlement's rough borders where he would be less noticeable. Neither could have predicted the life-changing revelations in Silverton. Their comprehension of Crawford's desire changes their lives forever. Elizabeth entered Silverton slowly, like a miner's wife on a routine errand. In the evening, shift workers from the mines returned, supply carts were unloaded, and ladies called their children in for dinner. Despite its rustic look, Silverton possessed the framework of a town driven by mining exploitation. The general shop was prominently located on the main street, with oil lamps warmly lighting its windows in the evening. Elizabeth adjusted her scarf and bonnet before entering, practicing her demeanor. Sarah Johnson came from Minnesota to get supplies while her husband worked a claim. A bell rang as she opened the door. The store sold frontier-style equipment, food, textiles, medicine, and small comforts. Thin and with glasses on his nose, the owner looked up from his ledger. "Good evening, ma'am. First time seeing you," Elizabeth said. "Just arrived last week, removing any mention of her Boston schooling. Hubby is on the Northridge claim." Subtly, the merchant showed attention and sympathy. "Crawford's Northridge," Elizabeth confirmed, heading toward a fabric exhibit. "Needs strong cotton for repairing. Mining damages clothes. Yes, Mrs. Johnson. Sarah Johnson." She emerged from the back of the store, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, and built like a laborer, as Elizabeth studied fabric bolts. "Herbert, examine the coffee shipment," she told the shopkeeper. Turned to Elizabeth. "I don't think we met." "Hi, Margaret Wilson. My husband and I own this business." Elizabeth repeated her well-crafted introduction. Mrs. Wilson's sharp glance suggested she missed little in Silverton. The elderly woman repeated Northridge. "Hard area, especially now." Elizabeth seemed innocent. Mrs. Wilson looked at the door before dropping her voice. "Crawford's foreman was shot in the back 3 nights ago. After then, settlement was tense." "How awful!" Practiced shock, Elizabeth gasped. "Do they know who did it?" "Crawford says women escaped his employ." Mrs. Wilson's emphasis indicated she understood such work. "Ellie Baker, who handles business office laundry, disagrees." Elizabeth's heart raced, but she did not react. "What says she?" "That Crawford and Foreman Jenkins had a tremendous fight that night." Raised voices, threats. Jenkins then rode alone. By daybreak, he was dead, the Mrs. Wilson's mouth constricted. Crawford blames these ladies and their barbaric associates, but many wonder if it was domestic. This was the information they wanted. Elizabeth skillfully guided the conversation, gaining details while choosing goods. Crawford and Jenkins fought over special acquisitions payment. Jenkins requested a larger proportion. Mrs. Wilson decided angrily that Crawford has the territory judge in his pocket. Owning the law makes truth irrelevant. Thomas approached Silverton from the west via scattered miners' cabins. He was practically unrecognizable after wearing a miner's cap, darkening his face with dirt and limping. As the confident guide who guided the sisters across the forest, the saloon was busy. Thomas slouched at a corner table, sipping a whiskey he hadn't touched, listening to the talks. Alcohol and mutual hardship enabled miners to speak freely here. One bearded miner said Jenkins always demanded extra percentage on every claim. His friends said he didn't deserve a back bullet. "You trust Crawford's story about those women?" asked a third. "It's handy." "Crawford has been peculiar recently, obsessed with finding those sisters and proposing absurd rewards," the bearded man noted. "I hear the document they grabbed is worth more than all the silver in his mind," another miner said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial murmur. Thomas stopped, contemplating this surprising information. "Which document?" bearded miner inquired. He replied, "Don't rightly know, but Jenkins was holding it over Crawford. Land rights, original deeds, or treaties. Crawford wants whatever it is back." Thomas soaked up every detail in the saloon for another hour. The picture was very different from their expectations. Crawford went after more than escaped property. He wanted something expensive enough to kill for that he thought the sisters had taken. Thomas and Elizabeth met at midnight behind Silverton's abandoned assayer's office as planned. Their predicament became more complicated as they whispered their observations. "We never stole any documents," Elizabeth said. "We ran with our mother's jewelry and clothes on our backs." Thomas mused that Crawford believes otherwise, fabricating murder charges and pursuing you beyond reason. Could Jenkins have buried this document in our belongings, Elizabeth wondered. Maybe his Crawford insurance? When heavy footsteps approached, conjecture stopped. Thomas hid Elizabeth behind a woodpile as two mining company guards passed by. One said tomorrow's patrols would double. "Crawford suspects the sisters are nearby." "Time wasted," his friend said. "If I were them, I'd be halfway to Canada." "Crawford's $500 offer suggests he needs them alive." Thomas looked gravely at Elizabeth as the guards left. "We must return to camp immediately. Crawford is searching further." They fled Silverton in the dark with caution. They realized their discovery affected everything. It wasn't only about cleansing their names. They discovered a land rights conspiracy that may have explained the Thunder Eagle brothers' struggle with the mining activities. Elizabeth understood as they rose to their observation position that they had parts of a puzzle they didn't comprehend, but one that could help them defeat the man who had jeopardized all they valued. The Thunder Eagle family and anyone victimized by Crawford's efforts may find justice and freedom in the missing document. The document's identity, location, and use to assure their existence were all that remained. As Elizabeth and Thomas returned to camp, dawn illuminated the eastern sky pink and gold. Their faces showed triumph and worry. Wakeful, the others posed with strain. The Thunder Eagle brothers kept watch all night, feeling the increased threat their inquiry had caused. Elizabeth announced without preface that Crawford killed his foreman as they gathered around the tiny fire. "He blames us for distracting from his genuine goal." She related her chat with Mrs. Wilson as Thomas shared saloon overheards. The group was startled when Thomas showed the mystery paper Crawford was eagerly seeking. John frowned profoundly. "Document on land rights? Are you sure?" Thomas said the miners mentioned authentic deeds or treaties, which Jenkins used to blackmail Crawford. "But we took nothing," Rebecca said. Catherine interrupted, her normally quiet voice suddenly clear and resolute. "Just our mother's jewelry case and the strong box." All eyes were on her. "Which strong box?" Elizabeth queried, voice confusion. Catherine blushed. "The night we fled, Father was drunk and unconscious. A small metal box I'd never seen under his bed was unearthed when I took the money tin from the floorboard. I took it in case it contained Mother's jewelry." "You always had this?" Elizabeth's eyes widened in shock. Catherine nods. "Locked. I wrapped it in my spare clothes in our haste to flee. After finding nothing precious in Mother's jewelry case, I concluded the sturdy box was worthless." "Where is it now?" John pleaded. Catherine found the object in her small pack, a 6-inch square iron box with a lock, in minutes. The only marking was a little carved number on its base. Elizabeth turned the box, thinking Jenkins gave it to her father for safekeeping. Michael said his father may have had no knowledge of its significance. Simply another item to trade for whiskey as insurance against Crawford, or was aware of its significance, which explains Crawford's rapid attempt to buy you three after your father's gambling debt allowed it. Their father may have offered his daughters in exchange for silence about Crawford's box. Benjamin voiced what they all thought: "We need to see what's within." John studied the lock carefully. "I can open this, but we need be careful with what's inside. Valuable enough for murder is perilous to own." With quiet determination, Elizabeth said, "We've been accused of one murder. I'd rather know our situation." James patiently made a pick from a metal file in his kit. Lock releases with a pleasing click. The gathering held their breath as John opened the lid. Inside were several yellowed yet well-preserved folded documents. With shaky hands, John spread them gently on a flat rock. He muttered, pointing to a characteristic sign at the bottom of one page: grandfather's mark. Thomas drew near. "These are the original boundary treaties before the territorial government changed them for mining firms." John stated that this chart illustrates the traditional Lakota territories, which included our grandfather's sacred prayer place, where Black Eagle Mine's main shaft is located. As the group examined the documents, their significance became evident. These were legal agreements that had been repeatedly broken. The Thunder Eagle family may contest Crawford's land claim using these old treaties, stopping his operations and requiring compensation for years of illicit mining. Michael, furious and vindicated, said Crawford built his fortune on stolen land. Elizabeth added, "The pieces fell into place when Jenkins found these records. Exposure was his danger to Crawford. Thomas assumed Crawford killed him and accused you three for distracting him while he sought for the documents." Rebecca now saw clearly after analyzing the materials with her artist's eye. "This saves us. These records can exonerate us and end Crawford." "Use them how?" Catherine asks. Rebecca suggested delivering them to Bismarck's territorial governor. "Even if the local court is corrupt, this proof would force the governor to act." "Bismarck is west," Michael said. John tightened his posture, indicating he would not go to Pembina. "It's Bismarck. These documents provide justice to the Miller sisters, our people, and Crawford's victims." Their strategy arose immediately. They headed west to Bismarck instead of north to Pembina. "The journey is risky." Crawford's men monitored all important roads, but the profit outweighed the risk. Thomas took Elizabeth to a quiet location under a tall tree as they prepared to leave. "When we spotted you three rushing from your homestead that night, we never anticipated our paths would align so perfectly," he continued. Elizabeth noticed his tenderness in his ordinarily stony face. Elizabeth responded with a hint of amazement from unproperty to be sold to justice partners. "We're both different from last week." Thomas grabbed her hands. "Elizabeth Miller, what do you want for your life when Crawford is arrested and your names are cleared?" The question sat between them, weighing alternatives she hadn't voiced yet. She said honestly, "I only wanted safety a week ago. I want something I never thought feasible on the frontier." Unused to such directness, she paused as she considered a purposeful life. Thomas proposed happiness, a shared future? Elizabeth kept looking at him. "I never anticipated to be running for my life in Dakota country with a Lakota guide." Thomas grinned a rare, full smile that changed his looks. "Life is unpredictable. Good travelers adapt to the path as it appears." All throughout camp, similar conversations occurred. Catherine and Michael discussed medicinal techniques from their different traditions, while sitting by the stream with their heads bent. Rebecca showed Benjamin her latest sketches for a series of pictures about the Thunder Eagles' fight for their ancient territories. By lunchtime, they were heading west toward Bismarck with newfound determination. John protected their valuable evidence with a plan. They deliberately distributed the documents so that Crawford could not reclaim everything if someone was captured. 4 days of hard travel across increasingly open territory to Bismarck would make hiding difficult. But Elizabeth felt something she hadn't felt since before her father's disgrace as they rode beyond the valley. Hope for survival, justice, and a future she chooses. 3 weeks later, territorial. A front-page newspaper report shook Dakota. Criminal charges against mining mogul Crawford include murder and land fraud. The story revealed shockingly how 3 sisters, falsely accused of murder, presented territorial officials with land fraud paperwork. Crawford's arrest revealed many crimes, including his foreman's murder. The newspaper did not report the secret conference in the governor's office where Elizabeth Miller and Thomas Thunder Eagle presented their findings, she explaining the legal consequences with her Boston education. He testified about his family's stolen holy grounds. Nor did it disclose how Harold Miller broke down and confessed to Crawford's scheme when challenged by territorial marshals. He agreed to hold. Jenkins grabbed documents from Crawford's safe without realizing the risk to his daughters. Justice followed unexpectedly quickly. Crawford halted mining until the investigation was complete. Fearing scandal that could postpone statehood, the territorial authority restored at least partial rights to unjustly confiscated Lakota lands. The Miller sisters had surprising options after being acquitted. Elizabeth declined an invitation to teach at the territorial school and instead founded a trading store with Thomas near the border between white settlements and Lakota lands to promote fair trade. Catherine's medicinal plant knowledge and Michael's traditional healing techniques prompted them to start a small apothecary for native and settler communities. Next spring, their marriage symbolized the bridge their family was forging across worlds. Benjamin fostered Rebecca's creativity. Her Eastern newspaper pictures of Lakota culture and the changing frontier changed national conceptions of Indian peoples. Their personal and professional cooperation generated lasting works. Harold Miller had an undeserved second opportunity, embraced sobriety, and became the unlikeliest advocate for Native people's fair treatment, atoning for past wrongs through humble service. As the Dakota winter came in, the extended Thunder Eagle Miller family gathered in their freshly built lodge, which blended two cultures. The terrain was covered in white snow, but mining scars remained. Justice like healing takes time. The eldest brother, John Thunder Eagle, who had led them through their worst days, raised a pipe. The country our grandfather loved may heal under our care, as his wisdom leads us. Thomas said, two vistas who became warriors, meeting Elizabeth's eyes across the fire. Elizabeth looked at brothers who found partners worthy of their courage, reflected on their incredible journey to this moment. They had been sold as property, chased as fugitives, and forced into justice. Three Boston sisters, educated but hardened by frontier life, found refuge and purpose. They found home in the most unlikely location. Elizabeth saw their story ending and beginning as the fire poured golden light on their faces. They gained more than safety from the paper that nearly killed them. They may establish a new world between the old ones where different traditions could strengthen rather than oppose. The winter wind carried wolves' howls across areas that would eventually belong to neither settlers nor natives, but to a future they would build together. You'll see two more noteworthy articles next. You won't want to miss these if it worked. Check them out by clicking. To avoid missing our uploads, like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell.